Welcome to How to Survive the Apocalypse. I'm your host, Ben Carter. The world as we know it is teetering on the brink of collapse. Empty supermarket shelves echo with the ghostly whispers of yesterday's abundance. Fields that once swayed with golden waves of grain now lie barren and scorched under an unforgiving sun. Society, once so comfortably cushioned by the fruits of our labor, faces a stark and terrifying new reality: a global famine. Imagine for a moment the Earth's vast oceans without fish, the fields without crops, the skies without rain. This is not a dystopian novel. This is a potential reality. The Earth's resources, once thought inexhaustible, are being depleted at an alarming rate. The soil that nourishes our crops is losing its fertility. The climate that once sustained us is changing, and with it, our ability to grow food is diminishing. It's a chilling prospect, and one that's not as far-fetched as you might think. As we've seen in recent years, extreme weather events like droughts and floods, coupled with the destructive forces of pests and disease, can decimate crops and cause food shortages in even the most developed nations. Now imagine those conditions worsening, the fertile lands turning to dust, the oceans acidifying, the forests retreating. The collapse of our food system could be swift and brutal, leaving billions vulnerable to starvation. The question then is not if this could happen, but when. But even in this dire scenario, there's a glimmer of hope. Human ingenuity and resilience have seen us through countless crises before, and it's these traits that we must now rely on. Survival in a post-collapse world would require a radical shift in our way of life, a rethinking of our relationship with the environment, our food, and each other. We would have to learn to live off the land again, to cultivate the soil and harvest the fruits of our labor. We would have to learn to hunt, to fish, to forage. We would have to learn to store and preserve food, to ration it carefully, to share it equitably. And perhaps most importantly, we would have to learn to adapt, to embrace new technologies and innovative farming techniques, to develop hardy, drought-resistant crops. To harness the power of the sun, the wind, and the waves to power our farms and our homes. It's a daunting task, but one that we must face head-on. Because in a world without crops, survival is not guaranteed. It's earned. And to succeed, we must be willing to change, to innovate, to persevere. Because the stakes have never been higher, and the fight for survival has never been more critical. The initial signs of the collapse were subtle, almost imperceptible. Economists noted a steady rise in food prices, tied to a decrease in crop yields. Meanwhile, environmental scientists raised the alarm about soil degradation, caused by intensive farming practices and exacerbated by climate change. These two strands, economic and environmental, were the first threads to unravel in the tapestry of our global food system. Simultaneously, social indicators started to flicker. In regions already grappling with food insecurity, civil unrest began to simmer, fueled by the rising cost of basic commodities. In wealthier nations, the middle class started to feel the pinch as the price of food began to outpace wage growth. As scarcity became the norm, governments struggled to maintain order and provide for their citizens, leading to political instability. As the situation worsened, a series of catastrophic events accelerated the decline. Unprecedented heat waves scorched prime agricultural land, leaving it barren and unproductive. Prolonged droughts in other regions created deserts where once there were fields. Floods washed away topsoil in another cruel twist of the climatic knife. The once reliable seasons became erratic and unpredictable, playing havoc with planting and harvesting schedules. The oceans, too, began to betray us. Rising temperatures led to the death of coral reefs, the nurseries of the sea, decimating fish populations. Acidification, caused by the absorption of excess carbon dioxide, further compounded the biodiversity loss in our seas, threatening the livelihood of millions who depend on fishing. Then came the blights, the pestilences, the diseases. New and virulent strains of crop diseases emerged, resistant to the arsenal of pesticides and fungicides we had at our disposal. Insects, unhindered by the usual predators and bolstered by warmer temperatures, multiplied and descended upon the fields like biblical locusts. Crops failed, fisheries collapsed, livestock perished. And so the global famine scenario began to unfold, it was not a single event, but a series of interconnected disasters that brought about the collapse. The world stared into the abyss of a future without crops. But in the face of this grim reality, humanity was forced to confront its vulnerabilities and rethink its relationship with nature. Because survival was no longer a given, it was a challenge to be met. And the seeds of this challenge were sown in the early warning signs and events that marked the beginning of the end. In the midst of this mounting crisis, societal structures began to fracture under the weight of fear and desperation. Governments worldwide grappled with the escalating situation, their usual mechanisms for maintaining order and security pushed to their limits. Policing took on a different dimension, as law enforcement agencies found themselves contending with civil unrest and crime rates that soared with the scarcity of resources. In nations where the rule of law was already tenuous, governments toppled, replaced by warlords, militias, and other factions vying for control. These power vacuums led to even more violence and instability, further complicating efforts to mitigate the famine. In some regions, borders closed and nations turned inwards, abandoning international cooperation in a bid to protect their own dwindling resources. Even in wealthier nations, societal order began to fray at the edges. Panic buying and hoarding became commonplace, stripping supermarket shelves bare within hours of restocking. The price of food soared, and a black market for basic commodities thrived. The middle class, once insulated from such shocks, found themselves queuing for hours for basic provisions. Law enforcement agencies, stretched thin by the escalating crisis, struggled to maintain order. Riots over food scarcity erupted in cities worldwide, and curfews became commonplace. In the most desperate areas, martial law was imposed. The veneer of civilization, it seemed, was thinner than anyone had imagined. Yet amid the chaos, there were pockets of resilience, glimmers of humanity's indomitable spirit. Communities came together, pooling resources, sharing what little they had. In some places, neighborhood watches sprung up to protect their areas from looters, their members standing guard through the night. In this fraught world, fear and desperation often gave way to resourcefulness and resilience. But as the crisis deepened, the question remained, how long could humanity hold on to its sense of order, its semblance of civilization, under the relentless onslaught of famine? For many, survival took precedence over societal norms. The struggle to stay alive and the instinct to protect one's own became the driving force of humanity in a world where the crops stopped growing. It was a stark reminder that despite our advancements, we remained, at our core, creatures of survival. As the grip of global famine tightened, survival became the stark focus of everyday life, with the critical first 72 hours post-crisis demanding immediate action and strategic planning. During this time, the four pillars of survival — water, shelter, safety, and stability — were key to enduring the harsh reality of the new world unfolding. Water, the cornerstone of survival, was the first priority. Clean, uncontaminated water became more valuable than gold. Rains, when they came, were not wasted. Every droplet was collected, every reservoir guarded fiercely. Those in urban environments turned to unconventional sources, harvesting water from air conditioners or dehumidifiers, or even distilling it from urine in desperate times. In rural areas, knowledge of natural springs and wells became a lifeline. Shelter, the second pillar, was equally vital. In the brutal reality of famine, exposure to the elements could be as deadly as hunger. Abandoned buildings, underground structures, or simple makeshift shelters provided refuge from the harsh weather and concealed survivors from potential threats. Adapting quickly to the harsh environment and securing a safe place to rest was of paramount importance. Safety, largely a collective responsibility, came in various forms. Neighborhood watches evolved into local militias, protecting their communities from looters and other threats. In some areas, survivors organized themselves into clans, pooling their resources and skills for the common good. Fire became a symbol of safety, providing warmth, light, and a means to cook if food was available. However, it also attracted unwanted attention, demanding vigilance and strategic positioning. Finally, stability was sought as a necessary comfort amidst the chaos. It comprised of establishing routines, implementing rationing systems, and cultivating a sense of community. Despite the overwhelming despair, maintaining a semblance of normalcy provided psychological relief, offering hope and a sense of purpose amidst the turmoil. In these first 72 hours, these 4 pillars provided a framework for survival. It was a delicate balancing act, a game of strategy and endurance. The ability to adapt, to think creatively, and to cooperate with others often made the difference between life and death. But as the weeks turned into months and months into years, the question remained: what would the long-term survival look like in a world starved of its most basic needs? For that, one had to look beyond the immediate crisis, towards the uncertain future that lay ahead. The long-term survival in a world bereft of the most basic needs required more than just an initial response. It required an evolution. The survivors had to adapt their lives drastically and permanently. They had to learn and employ new skills, repurpose existing resources, and most importantly, they had to rethink the very concept of value. In a world stripped of the comfort of supermarkets and pre-packaged meals, food took on an entirely new significance. Scavenging, foraging, and hunting became essential skills. Those who had the knowledge, or the capacity to learn, began to identify edible plants and insects. Abandoned pets, once treated as family members, became a vital source of protein. In coastal areas, survivors turned to the sea, fishing and gathering seaweed and shellfish. Others developed rudimentary farming techniques, cultivating hardy plants and fungi in the rubble of destroyed cities. Water, too, became a precious commodity. Rainwater was collected and stored, wells were dug, and rivers sourced. Water purification became a survival skill, with survivors boiling water to kill bacteria or using makeshift filters created from cloth, charcoal, and sand. Life without power was a stark adjustment. Gone were the conveniences of electricity and gas. Survivors had to learn how to make do with primitive sources of light and heat. They learned to build fires, to cook on open flames, to preserve food through smoking, drying, and pickling. They learned to navigate without GPS, to communicate without phones, to heal without modern medicine. Currency, once the cornerstone of society, became virtually worthless. In its place, a new system of trade evolved, one built on tangible, practical items. Food, water, medicine, weapons, and basic tools became the new gold standard. Skills, too, became a form of currency. Those who could hunt, fish, farm, or heal were highly valued within their communities. Communication, as we knew it, ceased to exist. Without the internet or telephones, news traveled slowly, if at all. Messages were relayed from person to person, from group to group. Rumors and misinformation were rife, but so too were stories of hope and resilience. In this new world, adaptation was the key to survival. The ability to learn, to innovate, to overcome challenges, and to make do with what was available was paramount. The survivors were not only those who were physically strong or well prepared, but also those who were mentally resilient, those who could adapt and endure in the face of unimaginable hardship. Despite the resilience and adaptability of the survivors, the post-famine world was fraught with multiple threats, both human and environmental. Chaos and lawlessness reigned supreme, spawning a host of dangers that were as deadly as hunger and dehydration. Looters and militias rose in power, capitalizing on the breakdown of law and order. People were forced to defend not only their food and water, but also their lives. In this anarchic landscape, conflict was inevitable, and violence became a grim reality. The strongest and most ruthless often ruled, their reign enforced by fear and firepower. Disease, too, became a terrifying adversary. Without access to modern healthcare or sanitation, infections and illnesses that were once easily treatable became death sentences. Hygiene deteriorated, and with it, the health of the population. Drinking unfiltered water led to outbreaks of cholera and dysentery. The lack of sufficient food weakened immune systems, leaving people vulnerable to diseases like tuberculosis, malaria, and flu. The psychological toll of living in such conditions was immense. Depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder became widespread. The trauma of losing loved ones, of living in constant fear, and of struggling daily for survival left deep mental scars. Environmental hazards added another layer of danger. Without proper waste disposal systems, garbage accumulated, polluting the air, soil, and water. This increased the risk of disease and also attracted vermin and pests. Weather patterns, too, became unpredictable and extreme, further compounding the challenges faced by survivors. In this new world, danger lurked around every corner. Survival was not just about finding food and water, but also about navigating a landscape fraught with threats, both seen and unseen. It was a world where the rules had changed, where strength and ruthlessness often triumphed over compassion and fairness, where the fight for survival was constant and unrelenting. Yet, in the midst of all this chaos and suffering, there were glimmers of hope. Communities banded together for protection and support. Barter systems evolved into structured economies. Skills and knowledge were shared, fostering innovation and progress. And above all, the human spirit endured, resilient in the face of adversity, ever hopeful of a better future. In the wastelands of this post-agrarian world, where chaos seemed to reign supreme, there emerged small pockets of order, microcosmic societies that bound together in the shared quest for survival. These communities were built on foundations of cooperation and mutual aid, a stark contrast to the otherwise prevailing lawlessness. The formation of these groups was often a natural response to the harsh realities faced daily. Individuals realized that their chances of survival increased when they combined their skills and resources. A group had better odds of defending itself against aggressors, of finding food, of building shelter. A group could share the workload, delegate responsibilities, and pool resources. And crucially, a group could provide a sense of belonging, a semblance of normalcy, a beacon of hope in a desolate world. The governance within these communities varied widely, often reflecting the character of its members and the nature of the challenges they faced. Some adopted democratic structures, with leaders elected by consensus. Others gravitated towards a more hierarchical system, with clear roles and responsibilities assigned based on skills and experience. Regardless of the structure, the goal was the same: to create a system that ensured survival and promoted harmony within the group. Trust was a commodity as valuable as food and water in these communities. Without it, cohesion was impossible. Leaders had to be trustworthy, their decisions respected, and their commands followed. Members had to trust each other to fulfill their roles, to contribute their fair share of work, to protect the group when needed. Any breach of trust could spell disaster for the entire community. Defense was a critical aspect of these communal societies. The need to protect themselves from external threats, be it marauders, rival groups, or wild animals, called for constant vigilance and preparedness. Some communities constructed physical barriers around their settlements. Others established regular patrols or lookouts. Weapons were crafted, strategies devised, and skills honed. The aim was to deter potential attackers and, if necessary, to fight back. In these microcosmic societies, a new world was being rebuilt from the ruins of the old. It was a world shaped by the need for survival, yet also by the enduring human qualities of cooperation, resilience, and hope. Amid the desolation, these communities stood as testaments to the indomitable human spirit, proof that even in the direst circumstances, humanity could find a way to endure, to adapt, to thrive. The fight for survival was far from easy, but the determination to forge ahead, to reclaim some semblance of normalcy, was resolute. And in that resolve lay the seeds of a possible future, a beacon of hope in a world consumed by darkness. In the aftermath of the initial collapse, the need for long-term survival strategies became increasingly apparent. The ability to sustain life was no longer a question of simply scavenging for resources in the short term. It required a shift toward self-sufficiency and sustainability. People needed to relearn forgotten knowledge, adapt to their new circumstances, and develop systems that could endure over time. Agriculture, once the cornerstone of human civilization, had to be reinvented. Traditional farming methods were no longer viable in the unpredictable weather patterns and the depleted soil conditions. Communities sought alternative ways to grow food. Aquaponics, a system that combined aquaculture with hydroponics, emerged as a popular choice. This method allowed for the cultivation of both fish and plants in a closed, symbiotic system, reducing the need for fertile land and fresh water. Vertical farming, too, gained traction, with crops grown in stacked layers, maximizing space and minimizing water usage. Renewable energy played a crucial role in these new societies. With the collapse of the energy grid, communities had to find alternate ways to generate power. Solar and wind energy became the primary sources of electricity. Crude but efficient wind turbines and solar panels were constructed, harnessing the power of nature to provide light, heat, and to power essential machinery. Trade, an integral part of human society for millennia, took on new forms. Without a common currency, barter became the primary means of exchange. Goods, services, skills, and knowledge were traded based on need and availability. This created a new, intricate system of trade networks, connecting communities and fostering relationships. Survival knowledge, once the domain of survivalists and preppers, became a common necessity. Skills such as foraging, hunting, building, repairing, and first aid were taught and learnt. The ability to identify edible plants, to track and hunt game, to build shelters and tools, to mend clothing and machinery, to treat injuries and illnesses, these became the new curriculum in a world where survival was the only goal. In this harsh new world, the old ways were of little use. It was a time of change, a time of adaptation, a time of innovation. The collapse had torn down the old world, and in its place, humanity was building a new one that was based on the principles of sustainability and self-sufficiency, of cooperation and mutual aid. This was the world that was being born out of the ashes of the old, a world that offered a glimmer of hope in the midst of despair, a world that, against all odds, was fighting to survive. As the old world crumbled, power structures inevitably shifted. The corporations, governments, and institutions that once held sway were no longer relevant in a world where the only currency that mattered was survival. In the absence of these former power structures, new ones emerged, often rooted in the most basic human instincts: the need for security, for community, for a sense of order in the chaos. In some regions, strong men or warlords rose to power, using force or the promise of protection to establish their rule. They built their power bases on the simple principle of might makes right, often leading to rule by fear. In this world, where resources were scarce and survival was uncertain, these strong men offered a semblance of security, even if it came at a steep cost. In other areas, power was more decentralized. Communities banded together, pooling their resources and skills for the common good. These cooperative societies operated on principles of mutual aid and shared responsibility. Everyone had a role to play, a contribution to make. Leadership was often shared or rotated based on expertise rather than on charisma or force. Yet, in some cases, the absence of a formal power structure allowed for the rise of ideological or religious groups. These groups provided a sense of purpose, a narrative that made sense of the world's collapse. They offered a vision of a better future, a promise of salvation, or simply an explanation for the calamity that had befallen humanity. Their power lay not in force, but in their ability to provide meaning in a world seemingly devoid of it. Navigating these new power structures required adaptability and a keen understanding of human nature. To survive in a world ruled by a strong man, one had to be strong, cunning, or useful. To thrive in a cooperative society, one had to be willing to work for the common good, to share, and to trust. To find a place in an ideological or religious group, one had to believe, or at least pretend to. In all cases, survival meant understanding the new rules, the new norms, and the new power dynamics. It required the ability to adapt, to learn, to negotiate, and to make alliances. It required the ability to see opportunity in chaos, to find hope in despair, to build something new out of the ashes of the old. It was a challenging, often brutal world, but it was also a world of possibility, a world of reinvention. In the face of global famine and societal collapse, humanity was finding new ways to survive, new ways to live, and new ways to wield and balance power. In this brutal crucible of survival, humanity's resilience unfolded in stark relief. People learned to adapt, to navigate through the intricacies of evolving power structures, to find solace in shared beliefs, and to persist in the face of relentless adversity. The human spirit, it seemed, was as hardy as it was fragile, capable of extraordinary feats of endurance and ingenuity when pushed to the brink. Yet this resilience did not come without a cost. The interweaving of fear, desperation, and hope painted a somber portrait of civilization's fragility. The structures that once seemed impregnable, the systems we took for granted, economies, governments, social norms, all crumbled under the relentless pressure of global famine. It was a harsh reminder that our civilization, for all its advancements and complexities, was still tethered to the simple primal need for sustenance. In the shadow of such cataclysmic upheaval, survival took on new dimensions. It was no longer just about the physical, finding food, securing shelter, warding off threats. It was also about the psychological, the emotional, the spiritual. It was about finding meaning in a world that seemed devoid of it, about forging connections in a world marked by isolation, about maintaining hope in a world steeped in despair. Survival, then, was as much about preserving one's humanity as it was about preserving one's life. It was about retaining empathy and compassion, even when the world seemed to warrant only indifference or cruelty. It was about finding beauty in the midst of desolation, about carving out moments of joy amidst the sorrow. It was about remembering, even in the darkest of times, what it truly meant to be human. As we peer into this stark landscape of a world ravaged by global famine, let us bear witness to the duality of humanity's nature, our capacity for both destruction and creation, for despair and hope, for cruelty and kindness. Let us remember that even when the crops stop growing, when the world as we know it ends, we still carry within us the seeds of resilience, of empathy, of love. This is not a tale of inevitable doom, but rather a testament to the indomitable human spirit. It is a reminder that even in the most dire of circumstances, humanity finds a way, not just to survive, but to live, to love, to dream. And in the end, perhaps, that is what survival truly means when the world ends. To persist, to endure, but above all, to remain human. Thanks for listening. This has been How to Survive the Apocalypse. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow us wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you'd like to support the show, subscribe to the Forbidden Knowledge Network on Patreon. Subscribe now.